Join former FBI senior forensic examiners Becky Passmore and Stacey Eldridge as they dig into the world of digital forensics, one bite at a time. Now leading their own consulting firms and educating the next generation of cyber sleuths, these badass babes of digital forensics bring sharp insight, real-world case experience, and a dose of humor to the bits and bytes that build today's investigations. From deep dives into business email compromise and ransomware attacks, Becky's specialty, to cracking the complexities of iPhone forensics, Stacey's obsession, this podcast delivers insider knowledge for professionals, students, and true crime techies alike. If you've ever wondered what really happens when the digital trail is all that's left, tune in and start parsing the truth.
Welcome back to Parsing the Truth, one bite at a time, where this true crime podcast focuses on the digital evidence and the facts of the case. I'm your host, Stacey Eldridge, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Becky Passmore.
Hello, everyone. So this week, we are continuing to dig into the thing about Pam. If you haven't listened to our first episode about Pam, make sure you go back and listen. This week, we are starting off at Russ Faria's retrial.
Russ Faria.
Russ Faria's retrial. So, Stacey, how did Russ get a new trial? And why do we keep talking about Pam if this is Russ's murder trial?
Great questions, Becky. So Russ's legal team filed the appeal on December 1st, 2014, and a Mooney motion, which the gist of that is basically convictions obtained through the state's knowing use of perjured testimony violates due process, aka if they knew somebody was lying about what they said, that's going to violate the person's due process when that is on trial. And that Mooney motion was filed on February 4th, 2015. So just a couple of months after that appeal was initially filed. And then within 20 days of that, the judge ordered Russ's case sent back to the trial court to decide if he should get a new trial. Then on March 11th, 2015, the defense filed a motion for a new trial. The original judge recused herself from that case due to a conflict. Then the motion for a new trial hearing was held on June 5th, 2015.
Yep, and the new judge reviewed the evidence, including Pam Hupp's testimony and deposition. He ruled that the new evidence from her testimony met the requirements that the evidence be such material that it would likely produce different results at trial, and that she was a person with the opportunity and or motive to commit the murder and had committed an act that directly connected her to the murder. This rebutted the first judge's decision that there was no direct connection between Pam and the murder of Betsy.
So this is going to be a whole new ballgame on this go-around, since all of that stuff about Pam is going to be led into this trial. But let's step back and examine where this opportunity and motive comes from. First, Pam Hupp was the sole beneficiary of Betsy's life insurance policy, and that change was made on December 22nd, 2011, just 4 days before Betsy's murder. Now, there's the digital evidence that points to opportunity. We've got Pam leaving her husband a voicemail on the night of the murder at 7:04 p.m., and Betsy is heard speaking in it. So we know where they're... So we know they're together at 7:04 p.m. on the night of the murder. And then there's an additional call from Pam to Betsy at 7:27 p.m. And these times are important because first responders said that Betsy had been dead for at least an hour before their arrival. Furthermore, during the trial, the prosecution put Betsy's death between 7:20 p.m. and 9:41 p.m.
Big time difference.
It is.
So let's also remember that Pam was changing her story about that 7:27 p.m. call. First, Pam said she made a call when she arrived home, but then her story changed to either being close to home or on the road while she was headed home. But the defense did have evidence that contradicted Pam's location. So, Stacey, how do we know that the defense had the evidence that contradicted Pam's story, but the jury didn't even hear it in the first trial.
This was when Greg Chanton, the digital forensic examiner hired by the defense, testified in open court while the jury was dismissed. And during that time period, he was able to discuss that he had determined that Pam's cell phone was in the same tower sector as Betsy's house during those 7:04 p.m. and 7:27 p.m. phone calls. And we know from that voicemail and from Pam's statement that she was with Betsy at Betsy's house at 7:04 p.m. So was it a calculated move on Pam's part to have Betsy speak on that voicemail? Who knows? But it does put them together at 7:04 p.m. at the cell phone tower that covers Betsy's house.
Yeah, and this is great evidence. For those people, our listeners, that don't know, cell tower analysis can be done by law enforcement. In fact, law enforcement utilizes cell tower analysis to track live phones on networks, and often they are through the FBI's Cellular Analysis Survey Team, or CAST. And that team consists of graduate level trained experts who go through a couple of days of training to learn about that basic historical cell site analysis. And it helps law enforcement to be able to triangulate or put cell phones in specific areas based on the cell networks. And so this is what we're talking about when we're talking about the movement of Pam's cell phone and these time frames that these calls are being made, because it's very important where that device is and at the time when the calls were being made. So this is good evidence because you've got a voicemail with both people speaking, you've got a call from Pam's phone, and you've got that historical call detail records with the cell site that comes from the cellular provider. And it's these historical call detail records and the cell site information that Greg was able to use to determine the locations of Pam's phone and Russ's phone. And there's no indication that these same records were obtained for Betsy's phone.
And I think one thing we should maybe point out here, Becky, is that these records that Greg was using during the trial and what Becky was just talking about with the CAST team from the FBI, this is different than any sort of location data or GPS data that you're going to get from an iPhone or an Android. This is coming from the towers from the cellular provider. So
That's
it
right.
is different than what you might be very familiar with as a person who uses a cell phone. Now, I think this is a big deal because so much of this evidence that the defense originally wanted to get in the trial during the first time around, it can finally be used. And the judge even ruled during all these different pretrial motions that go on that there was definitely ample evidence that directly connected Pam to the murder. But remember, this is the murder trial against Russ Faria. He's on trial for the murder of his wife, but the defense believes that Pam did it. And so they want to demonstrate that Pam committed the murder and not Russ. And so this is all going into the whole reasonable doubt thing that the jury has to decide.
Right. And it's all part of the strategy. So now there was lots of digital evidence that wasn't even mentioned in the first trial. So in preparation for the new trial, the police finally started digging into Betsy's laptop. It took them 4 years, but they finally found that letter on Betsy's laptop that Pam kept talking about. Pam even mentioned it 3 times in one interview. It was just right there, identified as a document. There was nothing complex about the techniques required to recover it from her laptop. No encryption, nothing hidden, no alternate data streams. Just a regular document.
Now, the prosecution first turned this letter over as a printed copy per the Hulu series, The Thing About Pam, starring Renee Zellweger. Now, I don't know if that was for dramatic effect, but in reality, this happens in so many cases to this very day.
All the time. We get PDFs or bait stamped PDFs, PDFs of Word documents. And this is a problem because it's not that raw data as we're talking about when we were talking
Yep.
about the videos from the Epstein files, right?
Right.
We're talking about being able to analyze the true document with all of that metadata that is so useful to an examiner, putting timestamps behind it, putting authors behind it,
Yep.
putting versions. I can tell you that having the versions of how many times a document's been edited is important, but we don't get it.
And I feel like a lot of the times it's just the default discovery position. It's like, we're just going to give you PDFs that are bait stamped and here you go.
Yep.
And then you have to go back and say, nope, I need the raw data. And it can happen going both directions because
Sure.
certainly the prosecution, they have a lot of stuff that they're going to have to turn over right away to the defense. But sometimes the defense is sharing things to the prosecution in an effort to get the case dismissed or whatever. And PDFs are fine for reading the content, but if you're trying to put any sort of attribution, dates and times surrounding it, a bait stamp PDF is not going to cut it. And Becky, we probably missed a step because we did not tell people what a bait stamp document is.
Yeah, it's a document that is stamped in court, and it is represented as an official document used in court proceedings.
And it just has like a rolling number. And so
Yes.
sometimes they refer you to bait stamp page, 4,925.
That's right.
And get up there. But
Yes.
anyways, let's get back to Betsy's letter, right?
Yes.
So in this letter, the writer, described Russ's increasingly abusive and threatening behavior and her fear of him. Now, this letter was written the day before Betsy removed Russ as the insurance beneficiary. And during the defense's opening statement, they stated that Pam was the only person who knew all about this letter that was supposedly recently discovered. And even though she had never seen it, she knew exactly what was in it. And Pam would be mentioned many more times in the trial.
Yes. So during the second trial, one of the investigators confirmed he never checked the cell phone tower records to learn where Pam was when she called Betsy at 7:27 p.m. He also didn't know that Russ's cell records contradicted the state's allegations that Russ listened to the voicemail from Betsy's mom. In addition, he admitted no one ever asked Pam's husband what time she actually got home, what was she wearing, nor did they ever seize his phone. Remember, he had that voicemail from Pam with Betsy also leaving a holiday greeting. If the investigator had been aware that Pam's phone was still using the same cell phone tower when she said she was at home at 7:27 p.m., calling Betsy and then later changing her story to being 10 to 15 minutes away from Betsy's house, that certainly could have been valuable information that should have spurred some additional investigative work.
Right. And it's never been clear to me why they were harping about like Russ listening or not listening to that voicemail from his mother-in-law. Because I don't know if it goes to the timeline or if they're trying to imply he was busy murdering Betsy and that's why he couldn't have listened to the voicemail, but they're trying to say he did listen to it. So I don't understand the benefit of it. And I don't know if the jury ever did either. But you mentioned a lot of stuff in there, Becky. First things first, why didn't the law enforcement review Pam's cell phone tower records? What are some thoughts on that?
I mean, maybe they didn't think about cell phone tower records at the time. Maybe they wanted to think that she was telling the truth and that whenever a spouse is killed, it's likely going to be the spouse that is the one. So they were dismissing evidence right there in front of them that they could have been corroborating or contradicting her statements.
Yeah, and I mean, there's only so much time in the day. There's only so many people to work on these cases. And so if you are believing the witness, in this case, Pam, that she did what she said, when and where she said it, then why would you take time and resources away from the investigation to look at her records when instead they wanted to focus on Russ's records, which is the person that they believed committed the murder?
Right, and you have to remember that doing cell tower analysis, it's not an easy walk in the park. I mean, you have to sit down and study the records. You have to have gone through the training. So it takes quite a bit of time to be able to put the analysis together. And like you said, they only have so many people to work on these cases.
Hmm. Well, and we have to remember with Russ's alibi, like he basically drove like all through town, going to game night, making some different errands and different stops along the way. So they had to check all of that stuff. And then he drives back home. And so, I don't know where his path led him exactly when he left his house initially on the way to the game night, but then he certainly had to go back home from the game night, and those two towns were like 23 miles away from each other,
Right.
something like that, or maybe farther. So you could hit, certainly more than like a couple of cell phone towers as you travel that distance. And we have to remember they're in the St. Louis metropolitan area, so it's
Right.
going to be busy. It's not like
That's right.
me in Nebraska in the middle of a cornfield. That tower is probably picking up, quite a bit of a distance
Exactly.
versus, more busy, more towers.
That's right. That's right.
So let's pick back up with what's going on with the case. There was a detective with the St. Charles County Cybercrime Task Force, and he said during the trial that he conducted a deep search of Betsy's laptop.
Mm.
He also tried to make it sound like there was a lot of highly technical and time consuming work to finally find this file. However, we know that any forensic software used at this time would have easily categorized this file as a Word document. He also said it was open with Betsy's username and password on December 22nd, 2011. And again, some of this, we don't have the exact transcripts. So is this just, did he actually say like the file was open with her username and password? Or is this them just trying to summarize stuff in the book? From
Yeah.
a digital forensics perspective, we're interested in this, but basically he's trying to say, someone on Betsy's computer who knew her username and password was on there, opened the file days before her murder. And that right before that file had last been written to, there was a search for some stationery templates for the document. Guess you
Oh,
got to make it look pretty. I don't know.
that's right.
And then that file was written to between 11:55 a.m. and 12:10 p.m. with a file name of just p.doc.
And P dot doc seems like that might be related to Pam.
Well, yeah, I mean, because it's supposed to be a letter for Pam, right? Because Betsy wanted to send it. She couldn't figure out how to
Yeah.
send it, because she thought Russ was checking her email and stuff like that. So maybe p.doc was supposed to be the clue for Pam, but not so
Mm.
obvious for Russ. I
Mm.
don't know.
Mhm.
There was no evidence brought in as to why the file was named what it was named, right?
Right.
And so finally, this file was saved on the hard drive at 12:10 p.m. It was opened again at 2:10 p.m., just 1 minute before Outlook was open. He also testified that Love Betsy had been typed in 3 times in 3 different fonts.
Interesting. I wish we could have gotten a hold of the actual transcripts to learn exactly what he said. It would have been so much more interesting and easier for you and I to understand, but
Yep.
you and I both know how difficult and or easy it is or not is to collect these transcripts.
Yeah, and we have to remember as we kind of get further away in time from
Mhm.
the trial,
Yeah.
I found other stuff and related to this, a lot of the, motions filed to get the new trial and stuff like that, but that's because news stations had posted those transcripts. Trust me, I tried to get it from the Missouri court system, but I did not have any luck because I think we'd like to know what exactly he said. Like, did he say he performed a deep search? Like, how much did he really say it was like super hard to find this file? Like, what was he using that made it so hard? Maybe he was using Norton Disk Edit. I
May
mean,
yeah.
that would make it a little harder to find the document. Not
Ye
impossible, just more time consuming.
I mean, if I don't know, it's one of those situations where you're like, "Oh, was it really that hard, or did you even look for it?"
Mhm. Yeah.
But, with the file name p.doc, maybe he was like, that has nothing to do with, and he was just avoiding one letter, character, or documents. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, but, Pam gave them all the clues of how to find that letter because she was saying it's about the abusive behavior. So then you could start to think, well, how can I find this letter? I don't know the name of it. What are some key words I
Right,
could
sure.
search for?
Right.
I don't know, like think abuse, scared, terrified, beatings, and think of all the different synonyms
Mhm.
for all of that stuff to try to figure it out. I mean, that you might get a request and they'll give you some keyword searches, but like when you don't find anything right away, you just start thinking, well, what other words might be used? And this is the only time that I will say this might be a good use of chat GPT is to be like, what are some different ways to say abuse? I did it in an actual case with a different word, and I don't want to say what the word was, but it came up with a bunch of like crazy things. And I was like, well, this is worth a try because who knows what these developers use for these words to represent certain things like this. Unfortunately, it did not lead me to finding anything else, but you never know.
Right. You just never know. Yeah. So this detective testified there was no way to verify the origin of the document. Who used Betsy's profile, who wrote it, who had seen it, whether the content was truthful, where the laptop was when it was written, whether the document was typed or cut and pasted, if there was an email account added in Outlook, or even the letter had been emailed to anyone. He also wasn't aware that Betsy only used webmail, which we both know none of that is true. A lot of that can be answered.
Yeah, definitely. So, what are some of the different artifacts? Let's talk through it, Becky. What are some different
Yeah,
artifacts, different things we could examine to try to figure out how did this file get on here? Did Betsy create a new file and type it in, or did Pam put
right.
it there?
Well, and we can start with it if we wanted to. We could start with internet history. Was there any logging into website? Was there any checking emails? Was there any sending emails? Could give us clues or them clues as to who is on the computer at the time.
Yep. And we could even check network connections. What network are they connected to, around the times associated with this document? Because we've got, some created dates and modified dates. He
Mhm.
knows when it was the last time it was edited and stuff at that. So like just work backwards until you find the most recent network connection and see what it says. Is it their home network or is it a different network?
Right. Starbucks, whatever, right? Evidence of any thumb drives being inserted. Go into the registry files and look to see what serial numbers are associated with the thumb drives, what volume GUIDs and what drive letters are associated with thumb drives, and if there's any link files from those thumb drives with documents that would be stored on a USB drive.
Yep. Yep. And always look for evidence of recent files. What the heck was being opened right around the same time frame? Was it a different file name? Was it named Pam's version of Betsy's letter? Who
Right.
knows? Because people are creatures of habit and they want to be able to find stuff. And so sometimes they name things very obvious. And we
Yes.
rely on that as forensic
Right.
examiners. And so there could have been some crazy file on there that said like Pam's version of the letter for Betsy to put on her laptop. Who knows? I mean,
Right.
but sometimes it is just sitting there.
Yeah,
And
and
then,
it's generic, as generic can be.
yep,
P.doc.
yep. And it can be like that too. It can be super specific and telling. It could be super generic and untelling.
That's right. That's right.
Nope.
But the biggest one is total editing time in the document. That
Yep.
is that's embedded in the metadata. It reflects
Hmm.
the time the file was open and the active file on top of everything else, but it gives you clues. There's so much data that's built into that document for metadata, timestamps, versioning. All of the information is right there in the metadata of that document.
Yep. And sometimes you certainly got to use your judgment. But, the way it looked in the TV show, I think that it was at least one full page of written document. So let's just say it's one full page of written word in this letter.
Right.
How fast can you type something like that? So,
Right.
say you find the total editing time is like 1 minute. That seems to me like that's probably a copy paste job.
Sure. Absolutely. Sure
But,
enough.
if it says much longer time frame, then it's like, okay, it seems like this file has been the file that's been editing.
That's right.
So then you got to look for some more clues. Who was editing? When are all the different times that was happening?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And
And go ahead.
oh, I was going to say, and then I think the last thing, the person from the prosecution, their witness said like, oh, you couldn't tell anything about Outlook. Well, you can certainly get lots of information
Lots.
from Outlook. That's a lot of bread and butter for digital forensic examiners, the emails.
Yeah.
A lot of people are using Outlook, especially in a business situation. So you can see what accounts are configured on there, and you can most certainly tell if Outlook was used to send any email. And, you could look at the registry for more clues about Outlook and when it's being open, how many times, most recently. And then, of course, the mother load is, and this would be back then, the PST files that contain the actual emails.
That's right. That's right. That you can actually read.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was certainly some more to be done. But, if it was deep searching to find the Word document, I don't know what he would have called trying to open the PST file.
I don't either. I don't
I don't know. We're just teasing and having a little bit of fun. It's super easy to sit here over a decade later.
Armchair quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Monday morning quarterback sort of
Monday morning.
situation. And we're not trying to be mean or anything. We're just having a little fun with,
Sure.
the words deep search. So,
Mhm.
but anyways, to get it back on track, during the testimony during the second trial, the defense also got a state trooper to testify that he checked Pam's cell phone and confirmed her calls to her husband at 7:04 p.m. and then a call to Betsy at 7:27 p.m. And remember, the 7:27 p.m. call is supposedly Pam saying she was home, and then later she changed it to almost home. And he also confirmed that some of this information wasn't allowed in this first trial. So that was the point of him getting on the stand, was to say basically Pam was changing her story over time and that none of this information was brought forth in the first trial. And then he also got into that text exchange between Betsy and Pam that during the first trial was ruled as hearsay because, and remember we talked about like, why is it hearsay? We assume they got her phone, but apparently they didn't examine it. But that whole string of text messages was between Betsy and Pam when Betsy was saying, I'm going to go with someone else to chemo. We want to have some one-on-one time. And then Pam basically showed up anyways. So this whole, line of questioning and testimony was basically defense working at poking holes in Pam's story.
That's right. So Greg Chatton is back on the stand. He testified about this newly found letter. Interesting fact, it was only the document on Betsy's computer that listed the author as unknown. All the others had names, mostly the name Betsy Faria. Faria. It would only be unknown if it were created on a different computer or if someone changed the author. The metadata revealed that this document was also created with a Word 97, and Betsy's computer had Word 2003. Word 97 should have a program name Microsoft Word 8.0, and Word 2003 had a name of Word 11. While on the stand, Greg confirmed it would have been impossible for that file to be created on that computer. Why is that, Stacy?
Well, Greg is saying, this file was created with Word 97 and that Betsy's computer only had Word 11 on it. And with this happening 4 days before her death, and it's the holidays, she's going through chemo, when does this upgrade from Word 97 happen to go to word 2003? When does this, change happen? And I think he would have said, like, if there was a mixture of documents, with both versions or that sort of thing, he would have stated that, oh, it's hard to tell because I do see an upgrade. And that's something you'd have to look for, right? Like, okay,
Sure.
what else
And
has word 97 on here?
right. And the fact that this document is unknown author where all the other documents had a known author.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you got to look for the differences and then try to figure out why are they different. So, running down the word 97 versus word 2003. Oh, this author says unknown. What do the rest of the documents look like? You've got to sort of figure out what normal is on that computer
That's right.
and then figure out, is this normal or abnormal? And you certainly can't
right.
figure out normal without looking at a bunch of other stuff on the computer in the first place to figure out what normal is.
That's right. Just like any baseline that you have to develop, you have
Yep.
to develop a baseline about what is going on the computer on a regular and normal process and basis, and what are the anomalies that are in the middle.
Yep. And I had a case recently where I was trying to figure out if I could tell the difference between a Word file that was created on a Mac and a Word file that was created on a Windows box. And
Interesting.
I found no clues, sadly. That would have been a slam dunk if we could have found that. But like, I did all sorts of testing, and then I had another buddy help me do sorts of testing. We're trying to do it across different OSs between the Windows and the Mac and all that sort of stuff, and different versions of Word, and no
No
luck.
luck. Dadgum.
Because I was hoping it would have said, like, word 97 for Mac or something like that, like a super obvious clue in the metadata, but no such luck.
Dang. Yeah.
Alrighty. So this letter that we've been talking about, was last saved on the computer on December 22nd, 2011, at the same time that the computer had been connected to a Wi-Fi connection called the club. And this was the day Pam told police she was at the tennis club with Betsy. Now, saving the file while at the club would certainly suggest that it was written at the club, not earlier in time like Pam had suggested. Now, certainly both law enforcement, the state as a whole, were capable of going down to the tennis club to determine what, if any, Wi-Fi connections were present. So I think it'd be interesting here to have a discussion about whose job is it to do this? Law enforcement, defense, who has to do this?
So I think it could be. I think it could be. I mean, whose job is it to prove? The prosecution's job is it to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would state that that's going to be law enforcement who is trying to reveal any of these corroborations between these statements, or to find out that they don't exist, or that they're negative comments, right? Like they don't match what's being said. And interesting enough, this happened in a case I worked years ago where the Wi-Fi connection and the name of the connection made a huge difference in where that information was when something was uploaded to the computers. I would say that in the end, law enforcement could easily do that.
Yep.
Easily.
Yep. And, they could go to the house, figure out what the Wi-Fi name was at the Faria house. I mean, that would be the easiest thing to do, right? Because
Sure.
they were in and out of there grabbing stuff,
You could
and
do
see
a
what theirs
scan.
was.
You could do a scan at the tennis club. You could take a device at the tennis club and scan the network and see what Wi-Fi connections pull up. It's pretty easy.
Yep. And let's also talk about the timeliness of this, because as anything, stuff can change over time.
Sure.
Now, in this case, this letter wasn't discovered for 4 years.
Yes.
So, and Russ had been in prison. So I'm assuming like the Wi-Fi is not up at his house anymore. So that avenue is gone. You could certainly go to the tennis club. Will it still say the club? Will it say something else? And then, are they going to do interviews and saying, oh, we noticed that your Wi-Fi name is tennis club. Has it always been that way? How long has it been that way? Do you remember when it was changed? So there's some of that legwork to do where that requires interviewing people. It's not all just sitting behind a computer and doing the digital forensics work. And so that's, part of our role is to hand out these clues to the investigators and be like, I see Wi-Fi called the club. Do you know anywhere she might have been that's called the club? Can we run down where the Wi-Fi is? Is this going to corroborate what you think is going on?
Was she at the club or the tennis club?
Yeah. And yeah. And this is another reason that I think it is the role of law enforcement to get this stuff is because of the timeliness. Because I think, in my opinion, it is unrealistic to expect the defense to go out and do it because stuff is not going to trial next week, next month, next year. It's years and years. And like when Pam goes to trial, this is going to be 15 years after the murder. If the defense was responsible for going and finding the Wi-Fi connections, that's just not realistic to find anything reliable 15 years later.
Sure. Unless they wanted to go to the tennis club and ask if at any time was your Wi-Fi named the club.
Yeah.
Right. It's not that it can't be done. It's that 15 years later, it's not realistic to have to do that.
Yep. And I'm not saying the defense can't go out and do any of this stuff. They can certainly try to do all of it. I'm just saying when many years have gone by, who knows what the results are going to be, if any.
And these leads could have been done back then.
Yep.
For sure.
And again, that goes to time and resources,
Time and resources.
They believed Pam. Why are they going to double check her story?
Exactly. That's right. So Greg also confirmed that while Outlook had been launched at least once, there were several draft emails.
Mm-hmm.
The book about this case says no email software was installed. So I think they're summarizing and trying to say no email accounts were configured within Outlook since Outlook is email software.
Yep. So finally, Greg gets to the good part, and this is the cell phone calls that were placed by Pam. And he's getting way more detailed than just the time. He is talking about where she was. And this is the stuff that the defense wanted to get in during the first trial, but had been denied. And so Greg testified that Pam's phone was inside the same cell tower sector where Betsy's house was, and that Pam was near or even inside the Faria house, and that the cell phone tower did not cover the highway intersection that Pam mentioned earlier, nor did it cover Pam's home. And these are the two locations that Pam claimed to have made the 7:27 p.m. phone call from. So now the defense has brought in cell phone tower data that's refuting Pam's story. And remember, this is the story that's changed several times.
Yes. Yep. So based on Greg's analysis of Russ's cell phone tower data, he was able to confirm that Russ was traveling through the cell phone tower sectors, matching his route to and from game night. Russ's phone was indeed at the game night house, 24 miles from his house, when the call came in at 8:50. His mother-in-law. Second, the missed call was automatically forwarded to the 805 number to allow the missed caller to leave a voicemail. It could have been Russ checking his voicemail because his mother-in-law wasn't even done leaving the message yet. Again, it's important to know how to read call logs. If you're not sure what the logs indicate, then you need to do some testing and try to replicate what the suspect had been doing.
Mm-hmm. And let's not forget the importance of actually taking detailed notes while you're doing your testing.
That's right.
If you remember the Murdaugh murder trial, there was one witness from law enforcement that was given a really hard time on the stand for failing to do it. And I remember the testimony was, the questioning from the defense was kind of like, so you're telling me you're all alone in the lab on the weekend and you're not logging anything or taking any notes and that's your testing? And it just went downhill from there from the law enforcement. I mean, it kind of made me chuckle, but I'm sure that law enforcement officer on the stand did not feel good during that line of questioning.
No, but that's how defense's strategy is. They're going to attack that documentation.
Yep. Now, speaking of testing, it might refute what you think happened. And that doesn't mean that you stop. You should keep testing to determine what in fact did happen.
That's right.
Regardless of the side that you're on, you want to know the facts of the case. So what happened? Because you want to be prepared for the facts. Because if you don't lay all the facts out there and then the other side knows all of the facts, that could be a big boo-boo at trial. That could go downhill quite quickly. I think we saw that in the Casey Anthony case.
That's right. That's right. It's unfortunate.
Wrapping up, speaking of testing, make sure to take your notes and document and figure out what the heck was happening. Now, moving back onto the testimony, the last day of the trial, the judge admitted Pam's bank account records and, more importantly, the deed to Betsy's house. And that deed showed her name was listed with Russ's as the owner, which is important because that letter on her computer explained that Betsy's name was not on the deed to the house, and she was really mad about that. And I guess the question is, does the fact that Betsy's name is on the deed to the house provide a clue that Betsy didn't write this letter? Because why would she get such a fact wrong?
Exactly.
And this is where the defense rests.
So the state called 3 rebuttal witnesses, 2 of whom spoke about the letter. The computer and the cell phone expert tried to dispute Greg's testimony, but on cross, he essentially agreed with Chatton. They also recalled the expert who had completed the deep analysis of the computer to find the letter. He said the laptop didn't prove that last Wi-Fi it connected to on December 22nd, 2011 was the club. He also stated the fact that the letter was created with Word 97 could mean that the program was on the computer previously. On cross, he agreed this letter was the only document on the computer with an author of unknown, as we spoke about earlier. You certainly can do some analysis to help determine when the laptop was first set up and when certain programs were installed. So the registry is a great place to find a lot of these clues.
Yeah, so certainly some digging could be done.
Exactly.
Now we're in the part of the closing arguments, and the defense brings the letter up once again. They restate the facts that someone was using the laptop while at Betsy's tennis club while Pam was with her. The laptop was connected to Wi-Fi called the club, and the defense was certain that it was copied and pasted from a different computer, probably in the 15 minutes while Betsy played tennis and Pam had her laptop. And again, I wish we could have had some testimony here that was talking about like link files and thumb drive insertions. And maybe there was, and it's just was not mentioned in the book because the average reader doesn't want to know those nitty-gritty details.
Those technical details like you and I would want to know.
Right.
Right. So in the state's rebuttal, they mentioned how Pam never testified. They also stated it made no sense for Pam to write a letter incriminating Russ and then to hide on the computer so well that it took almost 4 years to find it. We said it earlier, it was just a plain Word document. It only took so long to find it because they didn't look for it for almost 4 years. Let's remember, the forensic examiner who worked the case with all of Russ's computers and laptops said they didn't provide him with Betsy's laptop at that time.
And the same examiner, during his review of evidence for the first murder trial of Russ Faria, he said that the investigators requested that he search those devices for any evidence related to insurance and provided him some keywords to search for. And it's likely that those investigators were thinking that these searches could lead to some motive. And we'll always wonder if the state had turned over Betsy's laptop with the rest of the devices to this forensic examiner, would that letter have made any difference in this case any earlier?
That's a very good question. So the court reconvened later that day at 3:45 p.m. The judge read his decision aloud. In the count of the murder in the first degree, the court found Russ not guilty. He was also found not guilty of armed criminal action. The court ordered him discharged. This, my friends, is where the second murder trial of Russ ends with a not guilty verdict and his release all at the same time.
And this is after, sitting in jail for several years. But
That's right.
finally, he's got the not guilty verdict and he's released. Now, everybody, rest assured, we have more coming in future episodes about Pam. If you remember last week, we mentioned the murder of Louis Gumpenberger. And next week, we're going to have a special guest. We are going to have the digital forensics expert, Larry McLean, on the episode, and he's going to discuss his work and the things he discovered about Pam in relation to this Louis Gumpenberger murder.
Right. And Larry's going to bring us some hidden details that aren't known either. So we always like to have our guests on to share that information. So thanks again for tuning in. We can't wait to meet you back here next week. Until next time, stay safe, stay sharp, and as always, keep parsing the truth one bite at a time.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow us to get notified the next time a new episode drops. If you can do more, head on over to parsingthetruth.com and donate by clicking on the donate button. Parsing the Truth is a nonprofit organization, and we are raising money to send a new digital forensic examiner to IASIS training next year in Orlando. Thanks.